gentlemen, and welcome to another session from the old Wise Asylum. We've had a good week. Lots going on. Lots of diversions going on as well. Well, lots and lots of things are going on in the background that I'm not sure the mainstream are covering. So we'll have a quick look at some of them, and then we'll get smack bang into law again, because it's a follow-on from last week. But not only is it a follow-on, it's giving you the explanation that I've been banging on about in another way about the difference between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Because I know most people, if they're in any way religious, they trigger, they can't see this. And, you know, it's important. It's so important. It's the difference between everything you seek and not. It's so serious. So we're going to have a look at another way of presenting that, so that you can better understand what it is I'm talking about. Because I know a lot of you probably think, what the hell is he on about? He's a complete nut job. Well, I don't really mind. You can see it as you please. It's fine by me. I don't care answer to anything, and I don't mind. But of course, my pronouns, don't forget, fantastic and amazing. Anyway, enough of that. And of course, we're not going to get excited like I did last week, because of course, when I look back at that, I was quite, oh my God, what in the world? So I apologise for calling everybody stupid on far too many occasions. I don't know why. Although I think I was a bit excited because, you know, people don't get a grip of this stuff and start to pay attention and get a grip, then yeah, it's not good. So anyway, what are you guys saying this evening? So it's June says hello, good evening. She says hello, June. Untitled says hello, Sean, good man, love nature. Love nature, yes, of course. Jeff says good evening, one and all. Hello to me. Hello, Jeff. Slipknot says alright, Sean, alright, everyone, alright, Trev. Anita says pictures are crooked. Well, I tried my best. I actually did. I give it a shot tonight. So I might have knocked the settee, which knocks everything. Anyway, never mind. Good evening, Sean, says Paul, Sefton, Sean, and fellow members of the Wise Asylum. And Jeff says a big thumbs up. Excuse me. June says Paul Sefton, good evening. And Cos gives... oh! It's the smiley face with gigs on. Is he trying to say something there? God, it's a bad gig that I have to wear these things, I have to say. They're disgraceful. I mean, I'm glad I don't have to wear them outside at all in any way. It's just short up. But it's mainly these lights. They blind you. It's quite ridiculous. I couldn't be an actor like that. It's just too blinding. Too blinding, man. No good. Jeff says, speak your mind. I will. I'll always speak my mind. I'm just not as excitable as you were last week. Did get a bit excited. So, of course, I crunched the main bit together in another short, which weren't a short, because really an hour, and got rid of all the naughtiness, nonsense, and expletives. And so it's a lot more palatable. If you're upset by that live stream, just go to the video that come up after it, and there you'll get the guts of it. But you will be missing quite a lot of stuff, especially about the 3 trustees that we looked at last week for the Crown Estate. Because these points are important, especially when you consider that they are aiming to get rid of England. So that's Magna Carta, Bill of Rights, Coronation Oath, blah, 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 blah. Because this guy can't actually take the Coronation Oath because he's married to a divorcee. So the plan is to just, bypass old England. We'll put him King of Scotland and the UK. We ain't telling anybody. Well, I've told you. I've told everybody, and I'm telling everybody again. So this is what they're up to. Are you paying attention? Probably not, because of course you've got diversions galore. We've got Blackpool woman. What's that all about? You know, I mean, odd isn't the word. Not only are the coppers odd, which they are, but all concerns seem to be odd. There's a particular. I mean, I'm only picking this up because it comes up on feeds. So now and again, I'll just say, okay, what they're talking about now. So I've actually watched this one particular bird that's on there all the time, giving it the big gob. Who I found out is an actress, anyway, and she's very good. But yet there's a fella there comes on. I think he's the husband, or boyfriend or whatever. And all I can say about him is his eyes don't match. His eyes are not connected to what's coming out of his mouth at all, in any way, shape or form. So what's going on there, I don't know. Maybe he hasn't took enough acting lessons off that flossie that keeps gobbing it off everywhere. So that's all I'll say about that, but in my opinion, it's just a diversion. And also, it scares all the girlies. So that when they start to try and push this 15-minute city shit, girls go, oh, well, I don't care anyway. I'm in pyjamas in bed watching telly. So that's half a population bagged easy. So, again, it's just a bit like 70s Yorkshire Ripper, which was basically not the guy that they caught, it were two other guys, and they were all working. Or he was a copycat that they caught. The other two guys were actually working with Jim Savile. Okay, with mind job to frighten everybody to death, which he did. We had the Black Panther, we had all this stuff. He shot somebody up in Baxenden at post office, etc. All these things, they're there to manipulate the population. And because they've got the TV, the radio, and everybody's chirping the same chirp, it goes in the head. So, some interesting stuff going on in America, I have to say. Especially given now it's been pulled out that Nord Stream were carried out by Biden, because I don't say America, because they don't represent America. This bunch, Johnny-come-latelys with Biden, certainly don't. Absolutely don't represent America. So I wouldn't say it's come out that America did it, Gov. No. The Roman side of things did it through Biden's lot. So there we go. We've got Prussians or the Roman Empire beating the living daylights out of gas supply to Europe. Europe doesn't seem to care, yet you've got the Scots and you've got the Irish and you've got these idiots that want to go back into Brexit, wanting us to go under this command level of people in Europe that clearly don't really give a shit about anything, especially not the populations. Because rather than just say, yeah, okay, let's keep the gas going, they've laid sanctions all over Russia. And who's crying now? You know, it's crying. Norway, for goodness sake, that's a first. Because I a lot of stuff I studied in the past, there were suggestions from the aristocracy themselves that the actual Norwegian monarch hadn't been dragged into this. Well, I think we can safely say that that's certainly not the case today. I can't remember whether there's been a change over there, the application for the younger model, I don't know. But it's surprising that Norway's involved in that. And then we had Truss involved with the message. So whether she was just a messenger, it would come in via British intelligence, I don't know. Don't get me wrong, I would like it to have no bearing on the UK because it was clearly a terrorist act. And we don't want the UK, the Johnny-come-latelys down at Chalkirk, Westminster, dragging us into a position whereby we're classed as a terrorist state, do we? Even though we know that the intelligence operations have been doing that forever. See Dr. John Coleman, he'll tell you everything you need to know about MI6 and what they really do out there in the world of international politics. They don't, as he believed when he joined MI6, fight communism. They install it in any nation they can get the mitts on. He was in Africa, and that's when he come across the supranational organisation called Committee of 300, or the Olympians, as they call themselves. 300 of the most psychotic, high-end families in each nation who are operating the will of the same in every nation that they're in. They're the merchant class. That's what they've got stranglehold on. Trade, commerce, and all things the merchant class are involved with. Say, the banking system's part of it the same. In fact, that's an overriding control mechanism. So there we go. We've got all this nonsense going on. So what are they hiding? Well, in the Ukraine, what's interesting is Zelensky, in his continued calling up and conscripting people from all over Ukraine, he's basically taking all the males out of all these different communities that exist in the Ukraine. So you've got Poles, you've got Lithuanians, you've got all these different Slavic peoples that actually have communities in the Ukraine. He's basically just taking rid of all the males in those communities and pretty much turning them all into defunct female or women populated and children areas. So that's rather frightening. This guy's a bit of a psycho. I said the other week, and I've said it previous, you're encouraging weapons, etc. If you are, money over there, and all it's doing is basically just selling, and not just selling, but handing over weapons to all the terrorist organisations. So now what have you got? You've got a earthquake in Turkey. Very interesting. I looked at the data that's suggesting it perhaps wasn't a natural event. Okay, I'm always of the mind with those things to think, well, there are some natural events, and I'm pretty sure the elite would like you to think they have carried it out to give them even more kudos than they actually have. However, when I looked at the data, there are weather manipulation bases around that area, which of course, if you understand HARP, and then ESAP, which is the latest of it all, this power to do earthquakes, to do volcanic eruptions, and other scalar misdemeanors, unseen by the public, unknown by the public. The media never even discussed any such things. But that's where the real wars have been going on for quite a while, weather warfare and tectonic manipulation, if you believe in tectonics. But, you know, this earthquake, when you look at it, when you look at the satellite imagery, there is a definite circular pattern around this base, and then in these areas where these quakes went on. And I mean, anybody who's looked at those images is quite frightening. They're having a big inquest in Turkey because it would appear a lot of these buildings that have fallen down have been built by one particular company. Oh, 9/11, pre-prepared kind of thing. So that would have to be sort of connected. If it is the case that what we can see in those satellite images isn't just what you'd see from a natural event anyway, but was indeed coming out of this base. So that's another. Could be diversion. Could be confusion in an area where now, unbeknown to the media, Israel is attacking Damascus. So Syria. So they're back in Syria, bombing the living daylights out of it, specifically Israel. ISIS have been relaunched into Syria. Well, they've just been rearmed through the Ukraine. You know, it's all going on. You've got Michael Mansfield, Casey now, even though he's not the king yet. And he don't want to be the king of England because he can't, so he's going to try and blag it and be king of Scotland, while still holding all the land in England under his little wing. Now, God bless you. That ain't the way. There's no agreement made yet, ever. They tried it, and they've tried it a few times. But there's no agreements ever on this land of England that would sanction that. Regardless of what you believe about law, common law, statute law, whichever one, all the arguments people have between it, there is no argument, or agreement rather, that puts that in our law as a thing that can be done. So if you get rid of England, you get rid of Magna Carta, you get rid of all the Bill of Rights, so that's the parliamentary legislative law. It's all gone. And you're under Roman civil law. 100%. Right back, centuries and centuries of what our ancestors achieved, spread it to America, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and anywhere else, India, all these places that got our system, but also got the imperial side of things, or the East India companies, parading as English or Scottish, or, you know, we called the British Empire because it wasn't just English people that people did, it was Scottish, and it was Welsh, and it was Irish, etc. That's why they called it the British Empire. People forget that and think, oh, it's just England. Well, you really got to get a grip of this, because, yeah, the immensity of what's about to change as they try and pull us into a fourth trust, en masse, en person, you won't even be trustee in this new trust. You'll be a slave. Yeah, this is what's happening. The no-hide will be the trustee. Go for that magic cabbage, because I'll probably get well excited talking about that if I were quite not on that. Anyway, so you've got that going on with the Ukraine, which is interesting. Blackpool, woman, Turkey, Nord Stream, and Idaho in America. Not Ohio, where you've got the very suspect train crash, chemical leak, blah, 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 blah. That's very suspect when I've looked at that. I obviously couldn't say one way or the other, but it's full of holes, full of nonsense, none of it makes sense, it's garbage, which suggests it's a terrorist act on American soil. By whom? I wonder. And then you've got something else in America, in Idaho. So the politicals in Idaho have put a bill through together where they're going to make it a criminal offence for anybody to administer the thing. Whoa! Now then, you see, now this is serious because it's part of the plan. Another way to create a huge diversion and keep everybody occupied, so you're not seeing Nord Stream data, you're not seeing the fact that Epstein's files have been released, you're not seeing that Israel are bombing Damascus, you're not seeing these things, you're not seeing ISIS released again into Syria. No. If everybody then is hating the administrators of it, that's going to keep you occupied forever. And there's so many invested persons in that. What a great diversion that is. So unfortunately for you that have been involved in it and given it, frontline you were, because now you're going to be frontline to be snotted by the baying masses. I mean, come on. It's perfect, isn't it? It's poetry if you think about it as a mind-op. Poetry. Absolute pure poetry. You couldn't make this up, but they do every day, and we pay them for it. So, after that diatribe, what's going down here, everybody? Do it straight in pictures. Oh, I can't write an outro. I can't be getting up out my throne, can I? You know what I mean? No. I'll have to do it for next week. You did that on last week's show. No, I did get excited, and when I listened back to it, I'm like, oh, magic cabbage, like that. And I haven't looked back since, so I know what you're saying, but I'm very excitable. But I don't like listening back to stuff like that, because I did tell you were stupid quite a lot. So I was sort of encouraging parents, mums and dads, like saying, oh, I expect time I'd give a fuck. Do you know what I mean? That'd be an epiphany, wouldn't it, worth having? Let's be honest about it. So, yeah, I did get a bit excited, but even I were a bit, oh, what the heck? It's just a good job I could piece together what were important, and it's a lot more palatable. So, I certainly wouldn't suggest you share the live stream last week because it wasn't the best. It got the info out. The info was fantastic, I have to say. And overall, I don't think I cocked it up. It was just a few cringe moments. And somebody did suggest that talking about sheep shagging is low IQ. Can I assure you, man, the one thing we've lost in this nation of nations is the crack. You know, I don't want everybody to come in here and, because we were talking diatribes half the time, and then come away from it miserable and kill themselves. That's not what we're trying to do. We have to put some humour back into the game. And in England, every shire slags off the other. That's how it goes. Every town slags off the other. It's how it goes. And I think it kept a healthy society because we didn't really hate each other, but we had to pretend that we did. And that's just the way the English roll. So I'm sorry, it's not low IQ, it's exceptionally high IQ because I'm trying to, again, push some crack into the game so we can remember that we're all about fair play and have a good one. We weren't doing any harm, we were just having the crack. So there's nothing wrong with that, so I have to disagree 100% with that remark. So, evening all. Treen says, hiya Sean. Hiya Treen. Debbie says, hiya to you, Debbie. Last pill that everyone and Sean, I fucking love Sunday session. Otherwise, asylum. There's a bit of swearing there. Well, we don't mind a bit of swearing, do we? You know what I'm saying? It's good stuff. Because we've got an eyeball, some lips and an eyeball. What does that mean? An eyeball and two lips. Okay. A hill one, good evening all. Hey folks, hope you are well. Jeff says, mod in the house, good day, Jace. Jace Ventura 2, good day, Jeff. Wasn't natural. What's not natural, Chuck? Tony Moore says, Tesla made an earthquake machine, and he did indeed. It's good. They live a daylight saving to himself. And I did have an interesting experience last week. Very interesting. I think the pulse in these towers at REM time, 4:30. So there we go. Wasn't natural. Tesla made it. Yeah. Oh, wasn't natural. You mean what happened in Turkey? Well, I mean the jury's out. I have looked. But when you consider that one company now is being investigated in Turkey for having basically built most of these buildings that all collapsed but rest didn't, that suggests like the 9/11, it was preset. We did a lot of it work way before the actual events to capitalise on the actual events. So, yeah, interesting stuff. There's nothing looks right about it at all. In truth, only animated the Kurdish areas of Turkey. Well, that wouldn't surprise me because the Turks and the Kurds really have been banging out each other to death for a long time. Indications are that the EQ was induced. Yeah, I mean, for a lot of people, that kind of data might be a bit, and they're obviously going to fall back on the aliens because have you noticed that's another and the next great diversion. Yep, that's all. Don't forget, folks, CGI. Don't forget Project Bluebeam. Just seek out Project Bluebeam because it's not a new thing. It's been going on since 50s, and anybody that gets into this kind of game, these are the first kind of things you're jumping on. So, you know, many moons ago when I was looking into all that. And the key to it, in my opinion, is William Cooper. He's the key to seeing between the two ideas, the art, it's a blank. He's the key to that. And he's also, he presented what was going to happen on 9/11 some 3 months before it happened. And then he were taken out. There's been a claim by some insider that who's come clean, that said he was tasked to actually take care of William Cooper. So there's all sorts of malarkey going on. But William Cooper, to see him when he first came out with what it is he believed he had to do, and then when he realised how he'd been being used, it's very interesting. So seek out William Cooper if you're interested in trying to understand what the hell's going on with this aliens.gov that's all over shop. So, been a few train derailments apparently, well, as they know. White Noise, the movie, coincidence, not seen that, I don't really watch movies. Damascus is also now under attack, it certainly is, by ISIS. They've been relaunched now, they've been rearmed. From everybody sending money over to the Ukraine. They want money again for Turkey. It's everywhere. Money. Gives you money, gives you money, gives you money. They don't do it what you think they're going to do with it, you know. Live Aid, everybody they give to that, yeah, actually armed all the juntas in Africa. And Geldof warned about it. And he did it anyway because obviously he wanted to join. Yeah, so there you go. Exactly, so we need that humour. We do need the humour. It has to be funny. We have to remember that we can laugh. Because this is going on. It's a shit show. And it's going on. And unfortunately, it's not in a movie. So, you're left with a quandary. Do you hide on the table? Or do you get stuck in? I mean, for God's sake, it's an adventure. Why don't you get stuck in? It's no good hiding under the table, is it? Because the table ain't going to protect you when it comes down to, hey, lads, hey, you know, anyway. I love your crack, Sean. Thanks, Debbie. And your crack. Okay. Love from Ireland, says Kerry Thompson. Hey, Kerry, darling, love Thailand. Donatello on a time of those frequencies. Definitely, I mean, the pipelines were switched off 10 hours before the quake, too. Oh, interesting, where did they? Prior knowledge, indeed. Well, that's always the way to play it, isn't it? So, now I have to make sure I send this over because, of course, I'm pretty thick sometimes, so that you can see it. So I'm going to transition this over and then we're going to come out and we're going to go into this. So as I've said, what it actually is, it's absolutely amazing data because it puts it in a way that your mind can grasp. All this I talk about when I'm on about Genesis 1, Genesis 2, blah, 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 blah. It is important, and I know that people that are of religion are never going to see it, ever. But all they have to do is just step out of the religion and actually read the words instead over them quick. Anyway, never mind. So it says the common law. So this, I've taken this from a guy who, somebody sent me a link to this guy in the week, and very interesting. I'm obviously going to put you a link to his YouTube channel. He's been tubing for a month on this particular channel. But as soon as I started to go through his work, I could see that this guy, even though he doesn't speak it, he's got it. Now, whether he's seen it in that way or not, I don't know. But this guy has put it in a way that you guys can really grasp. So I've gone through this week. I have edited it to make it make sense. I've added parts where I can add them in order to further support what it is I'm trying to get across to people. Because this is the answer for all you out there that follow this because you're seeking the remedy, the out. This is essential. It's essential for the stat deck because this is where you're going to see your authority. But again, you have to see it yourself. It has to be something that you can grasp. Otherwise, it's pie in the sky, and whatever efforts you put in, you will undermine it because you haven't fully grasped it. So off we go. So what we're going to get is a breakdown of law. How it's like we did last week. We looked at it from the perspective of men that are minds that incorporated the original law before 1066, the laws after 1066, the changes that the Henrys made in relation to moving the Magna Carta into English law and afforded to everybody right down to the common man. They did it again with William and Mary, where they put the Magna Carta and the non-parliamentary law into parliamentary legislative law, in the Bill of Rights, Coronation Oath, Act of Settlement, etc. And then cocked up by Anne, who gave us the Act of Union, which is what they are milking now and hoping to conclude with Charlie Boy. Okay? So, it's the common law. It says the common law. So we're going to go, it's like going in an order of how it's progressed, but from an angle that's not so much seeing the nitty-gritty side of like what we did last week, how it all integrates, or it's supposed to do, but obviously. And so we can see, but this is the journey of how it was formed, so you can understand the changes, but more importantly, if you're paying attention, you'll be able to see the trail in relation to supporting what I've said about Genesis 1 as opposed to Genesis 2. Okay? So, it says the common law gives rights to the land. Okay? So if you own land, any rights you have come under common law. Okay? Okay? The principle, now, this is a twofold. The principle in Genesis 1 are the Elohim, but the principle in the garden. So you've got the God or gods from Genesis 1, and you've got the Lord God in the garden, through which all this secondary identity takes its authority. So you have two gods, right? So just bear with me. I'm not asking you to, don't trigger. Don't, have a cry and he's evil, he's not. I'm reading things correctly because I don't have the edit. I don't have to edit things when I'm reading it. Our divinity is simplicity. And I always say, the truth is simple, but getting there is the difficult part of life. Or simplicity is divinity. So the simpler it's getting, the more you're in tune with creation, Genesis 1. It gets technical in the garden because it's a fiction. It's a secondary creation, so it's not a natural thing, which is why it needs all the evil that goes on around it to keep it in play. Yeah, so when you're looking into the evil, what they do with all this, okay, but that is a consequence of everybody being in this fiction side, because it's off the mark, and therefore it requires ridiculous acts to keep it afloat, keep it going. So simplicity is divinity. The self is the self. So whom you are right in there at the core, as we've explored, getting back to source, that breath, that's who you are. But then, of course, you're out of that. You're looking outside. So it's a secondary self, not quite the true. So you might say that the breath that you were afforded when you're conceived from the get-go is being poisoned. So the minute you, your spirit, and the breath come together and conjoin in an avatar, you've got two sets of genetics, mother, father, immediately starting to poison that pure breath that you were that was installed with you at conception. So that's the origin of why they say you were born into sin. Because the memories, all the active codes in those two genetic streams are going to build your avatar, in which you are inside, that's where you live, you're going to be subject to them. And yeah, so that's the idea where self, and then there's an outer, and there's all these selves, it's which one consciously that you're actually identifying with, and then projecting it into the realm, as it were. Where are we? Is the self. It's already there. It's the absolute truth of reality. But what creates a distortion is the impurities that are added onto it, or the matrix. So there's the matrix out there. In you go. You need your avatar. You've got two sets of nonsense from your mother and father to deal with, as well as soon as you're 5, you're off to school. They're programming the living daylights out of you. Before that, they're injecting poisons into you. Everything's about poisoning your breath so that your spirit is fighting against all these things before it gets to its point of power in its youth, where you're coming into your own, and you're either going to continue at the level you're on, or you're going to go deep into yourself and start to reckon with yourself, because you want to move yourself back by cleansing that breath, removing the impurities, which are falsehoods, the copies that you've got. You're copying your parents, copying the things celebrities you like. If you keep focusing to these, they become a part of your conscious mind, and then they drill into your subconscious, and they become automatic responses to existence. So it's really, the game is, once you get back, and all the Sufis tell you this, all the yogis, Jesus said the same. Your kingdom that you're interested in down here, if you're on the right path, is within. That's where you're seeking the sustenance. That's where you're seeking the way out of the labyrinth. And the kingdom within is Genesis 1. It's man, male, female, created he, them. We know they've done some funny stuff and shifted that part of what is Genesis 1 into Genesis 5:1 and added Lord in the end of Genesis. That's the blank, people, because you then see a continuum. But that's on you, okay? It's on you, and hopefully as you understand this, we go through this, you might see that it is on you, and that there's nobody at fault, only self. Arrive at your true power. From that true power, you can now control the fiction. So I'd say that power, true power, is found in Genesis 1. And the fiction is everything that exists in Genesis 2. Genesis 1 and the first God principle is a notice of non-agreements. The laws of nature, which do not need a subjective self to form an agreement, before these laws can interact with the idea of the creation itself, so meaning you're turning water into wine. So what it's basically saying is, Genesis 1, it's not a place of agreements, is it? There's no commandments, no rules, nothing. Yeah? It's a place of non-agreement. You're given form, yeah, in the image of those that gave you that form. Off you go. Alright? Do you get that? Non-agreement. So that first one, there is no agreements. There are no laws to be had. You're in it, get on with it. So the laws of nature, which do not need a subjective self or a person to form an agreement before these laws can interact with the idea of the creation itself. So meaning you're turning water into wine. So the further back you get to that point, your water is then becoming wine. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to get pissed. It's not that kind of wine. Okay, it's another blank. People have seen it in that way. It's not the case. It's allegory, is all this stuff. So your salts, you'll go with your 12 mineral salts, you'll be turning them in such good order that everything, the chemistry, they would class it then as wine running through your avatar. God, the attribute, principle, and attribute are synonymous with each other. They do not exist without the other. The principle and the attribute are one and the same thing. So the principle being your spirit, the breath, and the attribute of that is everything you are down here. And then focus that as another way. An attribute to what you are as man is then this person that you created, and the garden is its realm. Divided, that you can now come to know the principle through the attribute, which is that moving back. So it's all about coming to know who we are, isn't it? So that's what basically that's saying. And you can do that through acting out here with the attribute, because the lessons you're going to get are teaching you something, aren't they? So you can come back to the source by experiencing this life through your avatar in the garden. But people are doing that in ignorance. Where are we? Right. It says, so you can now come to know the principle through the attribute. That's the reason why they're divided. You're just like a mirror. In order to see yourself, you look into the mirror, which is nonsense, isn't it? It's looking at the shadows on the wall. That self in the mirror is not you. It is the attribute quality of you in this avatar land. All right? You're still the principle. So we have come to the realization that when we're speaking about God, the principle, we're never going to understand what that truly is, because its pureness is absolute. And we are only going to be able to ascertain what we are within the attribution quality, which will then resemble always the principle. So out by its definition of the third dimension and how it manifests our inner self, our view of the principle is going to be onshore for everybody, because that's where we're at. So inside yourself, everybody's principle is going to be different, isn't it? It's a different aspect of what is ultimately what you are at source. But we'll never come to know the principle. Well, I disagree with that, because we can. If you get back to source and achieve that to the point you're now on the Sabbath, it's because you are now experiencing the essence of the principle. We only come to know the limitations. So we do get to know the limitations of everything, and that's out there. But that's out there in the garden, because we're subject to it, and we'll get into that. That we are being subjected to the Fibonacci sequence, which is correct. Everything is always, all life, biological and plant life, is all moving subject to the Fibonacci sequence. And we've explored that before about how people look. Beauty is determined by how close a body is to the Fibonacci sequence. And that is innate in us all. We can't get away from that. So we all we know what beauty is. Yeah? But if you're seeing deeper than the skin, the avatar, then you're looking at the beauty within. So obviously most of us run around looking at the beauty. That's just one part of it. That can hide a lot of nonsense, as we know. So, it's how deep are you looking. Those are not just numbers. They're actually descriptions. So he's saying the Fibonacci numbers are not actually just numbers. They're descriptions. One principle and attribute. One does not exist, but the others exist as one thing. Within the Fibonacci sequence, it's just one entirety of itself. But you'll never come to know the principles. Purity, no one's ever discussed pure light. They discuss the illumination, the shadow on the wall. And that when you get back to pure light, it's sound, it's the word. But the word draws its voltage from the darkness. The point of inertia within the center of this magnetic universe that we live in. So I'd add that to that. All science discusses illumination. So that it's discussing the shadows on the wall, not the fire itself. No religion and no belief will ever discuss the principle. But they are, in essence, discussing the principle as they see it. In this reality, you are that principle that's giving the reflection of the thing in the mirror. You're not the reflection. The same as the principle is not the reflection. God as a principle is non-agreement. The God explained in all your constitutions, so this is to do with your money, in your Bible, is the culmination of man explaining the revelations within himself and his interactions and observations in nature, that then converse with another self to form an agreement. So Genesis 1 is pure, the secondary one isn't. Yeah, and so you can now see that they've turned it Lord God, and because it's the principle in Genesis 2, then there's nobody telling figs when they say in God. They are. It's just there's two in the Bible. All right, and in my opinion, Genesis 1 is a God talking to another God. And then what do they create? They create the earth and the heavens, etc. Then you have a Trinity, haven't you? You know what I'm saying? You could say Mother, Father, and Son. Yeah, be man, which then works in sync with man, male, female, not this other where they've had to create a woman. We'll not get too bogged down in it. So basically, when you're secondary in the garden, you're playing behind this persona, and it's the interactions and observations of the spirit within there that's creating what he's seeing outside, and that then will determine how you converse with others, like attracts like, to which agreements between parties are then starting to be formed. Yeah, do you get that? God in all aspects of humanity are the attribute qualities of the principle. They are notice of agreements, and agreements eventually form through revelations, as I've just said. So I'm reading it now. Agreements eventually form through the revelations within subjective self and their observations made in nature. I think that's probably unnecessary, because we've already said that, so I'll just knock that off. God in the Bible is the agreement. The God that's not in the Bible is the non-agreement. And if you get that inculcated into your mind, you're going to see things and be and live in full freedom than you've ever experienced before, because you've never experienced freedom. A belief is a structure, is a confinement, and you're going to be as confined to the level of agreements that you've made to that belief. And then if it's an impurity, so you can say it's an impurity. And I've always used the word copy, haven't I? You're either copying or you're creating. Genesis 1, the only thing you know that you've got because you're in the image of is the ability to create. In the garden, under the laws that are coming into bear now, you're governed. You are limited. Your creative force is limited. And the more agreements you make, the more limited you become. Gold is gold is gold. You remove impurities to get the gold. You remove the ore to get the diamonds. It's you already are the entirety of self. You cannot be anything other than that. So what he's saying there is no matter what you are, you're always source. But here you've picked up impurities. And religion used the term sin. You are experience agreements to then form societies. So yeah, agreements of the like-minded, then come together, make agreements, and then other agreements are made. Before long, you've got a society going on. And you're doing that with others of like mind, and that's all the system is. So the system itself that we all see as everything, which is in Genesis 2, is a system that's based on agreements that have been made throughout history, and then the societies that have formed then back them up with enforcement, because obviously them that get in there first have got power. So then you can see that it is actually a pyramid scheme. Yeah, because of course everybody's in this pyramid scheme on ignorance, but that's on us, and they don't actually understand that that's exactly what's going on. And like I said before, people, when I talk to these people that are religious, it's clear that they believe themselves to be in Genesis 1, but they're completely and utterly fixed into Genesis 2. It's difficult to get that across. Where are we? Right. So that once you're into these systems, the system itself is a hierarchy, and within the hierarchy are the methods to which those agreements are carried out by all parties, which then they term the staying in honour. So they're honourable, and that then you're not imposing your will or to go against those agreements in any way. So the systems that have been built up are always there to administer problems. And so, in essence, what they were doing were trying to create foundations all the time in order they could build this sort of society in which they can all benefit, but they can all get along, and it works for everybody's sort of enjoyment. And then you can see that if you're looking at the foundations, like if there's a cornerstone of this that's being built, and the pyramid's got 4 cornerstones, they're intending to put a capstone on it. Remember that. That comes into this kind of allegory as well. Because they were trying to build something that had a purpose and kept things together, and then they try and carry it through into the future. And now you can see the start of all this, bloodlines and all the laws starting to come into place to make sure things are continued in the way that these agreements have been set up. God is within the system always, and God we classify as law. So law is God in Genesis 2. God is law. But in Genesis 1, there's no such descriptive. Law is a combination of the agreements that we've made. And when you're out of agreements, that's when you're breaking the law. So if you come outside the agreement by your actions in any way, shape or form, you then class as breaking the law. So it's law of agreements, not God's law. But because you give the principle in this system the term God, you can then say it's God's law. And in comes the system then to which you're in agreement to put things right. And that's when you're under the scrutiny of God, or the Lord God in the law game, and all his minions that operate according to the structures that have been set up. So you're under judgment by the laws that we've agreed, or they've agreed, but you by default have agreed because you're operating on person. And you agree to these, and then they're measured against your actions. This is why you end up in trouble. And you don't understand why. Agreements are the foundation of all law through reason, because they're formed through reason. It's man reasoning in creating agreements that ultimately benefit them, but obviously they want a system set up that continuously benefits them so they can stay in their position. So that's basically what's been going on from dot. Now, Blackstone's commentaries on property in general, it says that Holy Writ, it says, are said to be the all-bountiful Creator's will that gave to man dominion over the earth. This can be said to be the first agreement. But it's not an agreement, is it? So that's your source, you might say, agreement. We've created this, we've created all that, we've created you, off you go. That is an agreement in essence, but you can't come back on that. You can't come back to nature and say, well, if I do this, will not rain tomorrow? But then, of course, from the jungle side of things, that's exactly what people did, because they did rain dances and things. Anyway, we're not getting into that, because you're into nature spirits and such, and we don't want to take it off what it's about. It says, if you don't have the meaning of the earth, then you're not part of the agreement of Genesis 1. Therefore, you're going to break the agreement based on your own will, of your own ignorance, that you have the meaning of the earth, but you don't. You see how that works? That's the judgment. So it's a self-judgment, and because you jumped in and took the copy that has been formed by man in Genesis 2. So, you've got dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. So if you're no longer man and you become person, then them that are remaining man, or as the Insider would have said, divine, you are then under this dominion over all living things. because you're no longer man, so you're now a thing, a person. And that's upon the earth. So this is where their claims come from. But I mean, in my opinion, this has all been hijacked, and it's been taken away from those forces that would operate it correctly. And it's been taken, pretty much both sides are now being operated entirely by the angels that fell, and they've taken it off the angels that moved against it. And then you've got the other third of angels who are sitting on the fence and keeping an eye on things. It is a cornerstone of man's dominion over external things. The earth, therefore, and all things therein are the general property of mankind, exclusive of all other beings, the immediate gift of the Creator. And while the earth continued to form inhabitants, it is reasonable to suppose that all was in common among them, and that everyone took from the public stock to his own use, such things as his immediate necessities required. Okay, so we can take that on board. That's how it used to be. The first agreement, or dominion, so Genesis 1, and that's what the original God is, and that's what we're speaking about, from within. So that God comes from within, that's where you get your command from. Jesus then brought that back. So he was bringing back, they call it law, but not really law, that the original way, I'd say. He said he did way, the truth, and the life. So again, maybe they've implanted that he said he was bringing the law, because there is no law in Genesis 1. But then the other side, the twin side to Jesus, is used in Genesis 2 also, isn't he? And so when you look at the Gospels, you can take them two ways, depending on how far you've taken the programming, which is then going to edit everything you see. So that, again, is an unfortunate thing that they do to you, to poison your breath, or soul, as we call it today. Ancient times, what we call soul, they call breath. So it's not Satan, you have a picture of him just coming in and grabbing you and throwing you off. It's how well can he poison your breath, which naturally then by definition keeps you in his realm, under his command, because you haven't took autonomy to who you really are. We manufacture all words placed on paper. If you don't comprehend what an English word is, then it doesn't matter what the book says, because it doesn't if you're not comprehending it. You will always be in your own power, your own dominion, and that dominion is the autonomy to compose, to infect your will, your intent upon the earth in accordance with everyone else. So to maintain the peace, that's what the system is, to maintain peace. And you can't maintain peace without agreement. That is God's, that's the judgment, so that's in Genesis 2. Dominion, the first agreement, that which is an individual, but an individual before you become an individual within society. So you're an individual in the first instance, but then you can also be classed as an individual within society. But the individual that you are is that which has dominion. That right can never be taken away. It's impossible. It has not been taken away, but you can give it away. So what he's saying there is that whether you're in it or not, whether you see it or not, you are your source, Genesis 1, and that can never be taken away. But you, as a being, can give it away, and that's by you don't even recognise that exists, and you only take your points of reference from this garden. So you've given it away, About dominion first, as we said in Blackstone's Holy Writ, that the all-bountiful Creator gave to man dominion over all the earth, and over the fish of the sea and the fowl of the air, and every living thing that moves upon the earth. That is the first agreement. And we can't negotiate, can we? It is as it is, and that's it. There's no rules to negotiate with or around. So the second one there is, that's the game. And this is the only true and solid foundation. A man's dominion over external things, that is the basic foundation or cornerstone of all agreements. Because it is, that's our ability. The only ability we have is the image of what the creators said they were, and showing us in the creation itself. That is what we're here to do, and that is our nature. Dominion is the entirety of one's natural freedom on earth, subject only to any subsequent agreement that you make with any other individual or group. Dominion can be overreached relative to notice of an agreement. Dominion can be redefined according to the agreement one is subject to also. Dominion can be defined to include the type of power being used to control an interest, such as over a territory or over a property. The meaning is the right to make laws, to give value to agreements. An individual's right existing principally as their natural right is held by title of the monarchy. So in this system, your natural rights within the system, whichever nation you're in, the principle of that system is the monarch. So this is why they set it up as kingdoms. Yeah, but behind that is what we might call the treasury. And that's obviously Rome. So England is pretty much built based on barons getting a bit fed up. And then kings getting a little bit fed up. At not being able to take land and property because some people were handing it over to the church. So that, anyway. And now I've just moved into another phase of an agreement, which is who is holding that right for us to make sure that that right is always protected. And that's the right that the monarchy holds. So that's the right that we place in the sovereignty of the office of monarch. Yeah? To make sure that the agreements that have been agreed on this land are upheld at all times. That hasn't been happening for the last two monarchs. Okay? This is how they're demolishing England. And the plan is to get rid of it altogether and throw Scotland over the top of you while everybody's fussing about Jimmy Cranky. You know? It's interesting, but the haggis squeezers in Scotland that never come out of Scotland, they tend to hate English. But when they're in England, they're not daft, you know? And, the calls again for us to divide, that's just ridiculous. Because Scotland, you'll end up under Europe. You know? Anyway. The monarchy is the notice of that agreement. So that's the notice in writing of the agreement, that the monarch is the chief upholding every agreement that exists, that's on the land, that's in force. That's his job. So that it will not be overreached. By not comprehending what is the foundational principle of what it means to have full dominion, then that's what is settled. That's what the monarchy holds. So if you're not in Genesis 1, then the monarchy is taking command of everything that you express. And that is the beginning of law. So it's the Garden of Eden. So Yahweh was the monarch. The priesthood, were his gang. And the Garden of Eden is the first earthly king under Yahweh. Now remember, not all these things that I'm saying have necessarily come from this guy who I'm going to present his stuff after. But obviously, his way is excellent, and I thought I just have to put this because it's another method of you understanding what you need to understand. That's the basis of natural law, that notices that everyone has a right to effect their intent upon the earth, inasmuch as that it's not going against the basic foundation principle of having dominion. That you are not affecting your will without first having agreement for that person to say, yeah, I'm in agreement with you, therefore we're in honour of that agreement. And then that overreaches your dominion. So if you make an agreement and come out of it, you're always in dishonour. And this is why, even though you can see the system's shit, if you're going to tap into it by one method or another, then you can't then start striking, and trying to move against it, which we've all done. And then cried our eyes out. But of course, this is what it's saying. These agreements have to be upheld. And just because you don't understand the agreement side of things, doesn't mean you're in the right. There's another way to deal with this situation. And this is why it's important you grasp this Genesis 1, Genesis 2 thing. That's the basis of natural law. I've done that. You always have dominion, but once you form an agreement, that agreement diminishes dominion of self and enters a society. In order to have value, the mechanic establishes an honour-based system. You have to remain in honour to stay within the agreed terms, and a new cornerstone is created. Excuse me. And classed then as natural rights. Dominion takes on a new image, a new foundational cornerstone, and is the beginning of man's law, to which the monarchy holds dominion and is thus the arbitrator. As this pertains to English law, it will be said to be one who holds the legal title before it splits into a use. Okay, so English law is about title, and then it splits again into, so you've got rights as a tenant, and then you've got rights of usage. Yeah? And then another shift is birthed, and that's in rights and then into usage, all being controlled ultimately by the king. This new use becomes a legal title, having an equitable title. So now this is where equity starts to creep in. To law. Law, everyone chooses for themselves. It can be no other way that has the right in order for dominion. So that's the basic premise, that we all have. We're all actually choosing what it is we're subject to. But it's the fact that we don't know today that's the problem. So let's say we're going to follow syllogism. To say that everything's in perfect order, that it's our misinterpretation or ignorance of what that order is that gets us into trouble and into confusion. And thereby we're now relegated to a belief. And that belief is the impurity that then distorts our reality and changes our reality and gets us glossed within different elements of the law, and thereby creates obligations. More obligations. You know, as you get in trouble, it's fines, it can be prison. All these things, if there's a war, you can be conscripted. These are all obligations, paying tax again. These are all the obligations that you have to then pay when you're in that system. We don't even know what we're obligated by our own misinterpretation of what law is. One cannot grant, convey, alienate, gift, or dispose of. Otherwise, without first having the legal right, the very thing being transferred over to another. So we don't understand how it's working. You cannot pass over to someone that which you don't first possess. It's common sense. In common law, and state in land was transferred via livery of sizing, and was the only way in which the land could be conveyed. So we shifted land around through livery of sizing back in the day. English law is a hierarchical system of land, of holding an interest in land. It doesn't govern man, because man is with dominion. English law governs over agreements, and agreements to those interests in land. So it governs land based on a hierarchical system where everything from top down falls like top down. The next thing is that we've got to create agreements in order to make sure that the minions never interfere. So we create law, which is then classed as God in this second, and then a man's realm, so secondary and garden. Everyone chooses from the self of what law they want to use in order to affect their will and their free will to interact with society. But of course, your ideas of what free will is are limited because of this quandary. You have always had dominion, you've never not had it. You are making agreements right now voluntarily, but you may not in most cases understand what agreements you're making. To find yourself asking, why am I obligated to something and why am I getting penalised? Why am I getting thrown into jail? Why am I getting fines? Why do I have to pay taxes? Why are those things happening? Because you're in an agreement somewhere along the line. This is your person, folks. You know, this is the person that we've bagged on about for years now. And I know a lot of you are starting to grasp. That you've made an agreement by your own actions to possess those things within the agreement itself. So yeah, when we, as much as we hate it, once we've signed in the person into the agreement with the DVLA, that person's in the agreement. So then that's why they want ID. They want you to show that you're that person, and they can have you. They can do business. You know, this is what it's why it's like this. So the very first foundation of law to land in the garden was a hierarchical system which began before 1066. But for this term, we're going to start from AD 1066, so this is according to the British Isles, when William the Conqueror, or William the Purchaser, usurped the throne and created a militant-style form of land holdings, whereby he gave certain knights power to hold over a tenure of land based on their personal agreement to being in allegiance with the king, William himself, and that they to fulfil the obligations of holding this these new rights to the land, whereby each one supports each other, and by doing so, the whole collective, the whole entirety agreement, the whole God is held together. And that was based on each individual's agreement to one core cause, which is held in the monarchy or the king of that time. All right? So that's what 1066 were about. The king was to be the absolute end of where the land is held, so everything is cheated back to the king. Everything was held in the king in one central core. We can call it a trust. Everyone's agreed the land that is going to be held in one central area to which one person in that centralisation will make an agreement to and for that they'll protect it. And it's the king. They will do a service to protect that interest by being a knight or a baron or a tenant-in-chief, and that knight will then command an army of subsequent knights who became lords. So division all the way down the pyramid. So it's king, barons, lords. Yeah? Hang on a minute. And the knight will then command an army of subsequent knights which became lords. So division all the way down the pyramid. This is why it's hierarchical. They hold a certain area, unless, for a lack of a better word, in acreage. They are the management, the administrators over those who want to be protected under that society, who then pray to the Lord and give their full allegiance to the Lord. And who gives allegiance to the king. Right? And each one was protected within itself for the rights that they were given to hold that peace. Villains will have a certain right, but some peasants will have a less right, and women, children, even lesser right. Everybody just upheld the land tenure system, or the feudal land tenure system, by giving a subsequent allegiance to each other higher in title, which then became lords. Who then became lords. So the barons shifted, in time down to lords, as we understand today. And the lords answered to a baron, and that baron had a personal agreement to the king, which was the common law. And you had to have a legal title in common law to hold an interest. There was no equitable title at that time. Okay, so it were all done on contracts, agreements, tenure, land titles to the king, and then set down the pyramid. You were still a tenant as a baron, but you only had a legal title. There was nothing else, and that's all the common law established. Yeah. So the baron is a trustee, holds the legal title in the trust situation. Yeah. The beneficiary and settler and grantor is the king, or grantor and beneficiary would say. The grantor is the church as the treasury. So you can see now why all this feigned nonsense about falling out with the church and blah, 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 blah. Francis pulled it all back in, didn't he? In September. Remember that. So you can see it all coming back. They've given it air and it's come all the way back like an elastic band. And here they go, they've expanded everything and entrapped a lot more people. Where are we there? That you gave to the offer the whole for the moment to show that they witnessed and held your land interest, and now you're going to pass it on to a new party. It was common law, and it had to be so, as there was no paper per se that transferred a title. It was done by a physical act of something that was tangible, like a rock or a piece of wood or whatever. That's how you transferred land, and it also, in that time, land was through a patriarchal system. So the land was set down through the patriarchal, because you're in the garden, of a bloodline that your firstborn were given the rights or primogeniture to then give allegiance in the common law. So the firstborn is being trained to do exactly what his father's doing, and being trained in the rights of the agreements, the rules of the agreements, in order he can take it over and work as a tenant for the king. Yeah. So that's what primogeniture is. Everything has a meaning. They don't do things for nothing. As it was given that you were by right as the baron, And that was how the system transferred and noticed property rights. So primogeniture, that's how it was done before it got onto title and such. But if you died as a knight and you didn't have a firstborn, the land went back to the king. If you did not do something, or you did something that was unsavoury or was unpopular to the king, you were showing some means in which you were trying to control an interest that wasn't for the benefit of the whole. You could be usurped. The land could be usurped. There was a lot of different things that could remove you from that right of having that land. But if you were the firstborn, you had the first right when your father died, and you were then given the first right to now pay allegiance to the king, and given the sack, the same fee or the services, it was a service to the king to command. So if your dad was full of debt, you took it on. And you were going to command an army for the king. You know, you were going to have knights, lords and knights beneath you, who commanded the villains and then the serfs, the peasants and so forth, down to the bottom of the agreement or the pyramid. Now we get to equity. Now this is where we start to get things on title, deeds, money, paperwork. The civil law gave right to the person. Alright? And civil law is Roman law. Yeah, and where's your first person? Originally? Right, your baptism. So that's the first player to person originally emanating from the church. Now we have this kingly system that we're doing battle all the time to try and build its thing away from the church. They've retook that back through Napoleon, through what they've done in Blighty since the Napoleonic Wars. They've now recaptured all the monarch systems and have slowly been taking away their power, England being the final. So that's again what they've done. We spoke about common law. We dropped down from dominion of Genesis 1 and under the Lord God in Genesis 2, which accordingly determines which dominion you stand under. Genesis 1 is your dominion. Genesis 2 puts you under dominion. Simplicity is divinity, complexity is standing under existing and new agreements. But the key to this is truth. To this truth has been removed from your grasp unless you seek it with all your energy. Yeah, because it's doable. I've sought it with all my energy for 30 years. You know, and I'm only just in this last 3 years as a consistent thing, started to really come to understand what it is, the problems, the issues, and more importantly, we're seeking how to remedy that. So, we further develop law, we'll go into an equity. In equity, law property is transferred via the convenience of registered legal titles, commanding what is right and prohibiting what is wrong, according to a defined agreement. Okay, so your original title entry, no surname. To fix you as dead, without you finding out, it's SQV and surname. Did you get that? Equity came from the law. So when they say they're fulfilling the law as Jesus commanded, the Jesus in Genesis 2, then they are fulfilling the law that were made up of all these agreements that they're all operating. Can you see? Equity came from the law. The law is that which is a personal agreement made into the hierarchical system of the king, who holds absolute title to all land. And that was developed more through 1066, through the Doomsday Book, which is the full accounting of every creepy thing, little thing on earth, all the chattel of those who hold a land interest, and the parties that were subject to the land interest. It was a full accounting, or a full book, that predetermined what is interest and how much interest each of those parties held, so that the king knew what you had and what you were responsible for, to pay fees and do what you were responsible to do and protect, okay, as a tenant, whichever level you were at. So previous to all this isn't what it was. And that's when the church had it in the time of Alfred. So law is commanding what is right and prohibiting what is wrong according to a defined agreement. An agreement is just the Lord God. And as I said, law is the Lord God, as the Lord God is law. Because there is nothing coming out of Genesis 1. Different gods. Law is also known as God, and the God to which all titles are subject, which grants and securities. define powers and duties of all legal titles in order to establish obligations for and behalf of each individual in perpetuity within a class of people. English law only deals with legal percentages. It doesn't give us an individual. It can't deal with the individual because you have dominion. It doesn't deal with your life, your living being. It deals with land and gives rules of engagement upon that land to set up an interest, to which you make an agreement. Therefore, you overreach your dominion rights because now you're dealing within avenues of legal personages. So you've stepped out to Genesis 1, you're under dominion of this other. And you've picked up legal personages, and legal personages are just perpetuity instruments. So they go on and on. So they have to register your birth, they have to register your death, hopefully you haven't took control of the estate. It continues to them in perpetuity. It's a perpetuity instrument if you don't do what it is you're supposed to do. It's a way of creating a foundation, and it is the foundation for that system. So they are the beneficiaries, will always be the beneficiaries, and you are in the position you are because of the agreements you've made. It's irrelevant whether they're done in ignorance. It is on you. So when you say the monarchy, that is a complete settlement of what those duties and obligations are. If you are the President of the United States, those are set duties and obligations to perform so that we know what they are, so that if we ever need them or we are needing to do something or they're not doing something. So you need to know the rules, don't you? They depend on you not knowing the rules and not being interested. Yeah, and they've got away with that for 200 years. They played this, then they've took it out of education because obviously you weren't interested. So now it's not even there. You and me, how it's on us. This is how they stay in honour, because they're honouring the agreements or body of law that have been set up that we call English law. Everything in English law is legal percentage. Get over the name. Get over the name game, all that kind of stuff. You have to have a legal message in order to affect English law, because it doesn't deal with you as a live being, it deals with interest to land and those agreements. Yeah? So we go into English law holding an interest in right of another. So that's usufruct. They don't like you using that term, do they? That's what it is. It's a hierarchical system. All land from 1066 made all land subject to a tenure, and that tenure was in agreement. It's you holding a land interest for the right of another. Where the barons held it in right of the king, immediately below the barons, the lords held it on behalf of the king, but through the barons. The villains are beneath the lords, and on down to the serfs, the peasants, all acting to furnish the king. The barons in common law held immediately in right of the king against top down. It's all based on a form to create a foundational principle, so that everyone serving the person of kings being served by the whole, each serving the other, and thus we arrive at a key point. All are in a complete agreement as to what is God and what is law. And this is why they say the laws of God. It's in the garden. We have here a settled hierarchical system of land rights dependent upon the status of a legal percentage used against the type of interest available according to the power and duty of the status. So legal percentages are just an establishment of agreements of duties and powers. You can even say it prohibits limitations that belong to the legal personage in perpetuity. Are you Mr., a doctor, KC? Yeah, these are titles, and again they're establishing your powers and your duty, your status. Perpetuity is a fiction. We can expand upon that. See that what is the fiction is. English law is only dealing with fictions. It creates a base foundation for each legal percentage to perform a duty and power subject to the entirety of the law that fits within the cog. The law administrates rules over actions according to the interest held by each legal personage. And it's a status, and that status then has a right predominantly associated with a certain subject matter. And that subject matter then becomes the law that is enforced. That creates a jurisdiction under which one finds remedy. If the legal responder has a problem with either another of like legal status or a lower rate, then the agreement will decide the ruling. So let's say you are a baron. You most likely wouldn't deal with the serf or peasant or villain. You would deal with your lord, and the lord would then say, okay, well now I've got to deal with that. That's the villain now will be, and then the villain passed on down and down and down. That's how it works. That's what we call corporocracy. That there is a hierarchical system of CAO to base management to branch management to territory managers until you get down to the teller, to the worker. It's everyone's functioning for the benefit of the whole, and you're somewhere along the line making agreements to the whole. So no one is subject to English law. That is a true fact. You're not under English law. You are in agreement to be obligated to perform some duty or action within the law. But you're not under English law unless there's an agreement. The system looks at agreement. It doesn't look at you, it looks at agreement. And is based on your actions, you're performing a certain agreement. Therefore, it creates an obligation, and just like the barons would be against a baron, they would have a certain structure, that they would create a community to discuss matters that would be relative to the king, because that's the only party they would deal with, that they were subject to, which the barons would also then create a hierarchical system to make sure they're managing their land and property. Their land properly, and that baron was called the Curia Regis. The Curia Regis is just that, an instrument that a group of barons that later on moved on to the lords, or lords as we know. We did discuss Curia Regis last week. We call Parliament today, and we call it today our government. Today's government are the tier down from the Curia Regis, which were the barons, who were the top management group that dealt with the king and also were in charge of managing their lords. Yeah, so the House of Lords was the Curia Regis. Tony Blair, they've been demolishing that for quite a time. It reads this way: no one subject to English law can hold a lordium title. It doesn't exist because just for the very fact that I said it's a top tier system, there's always a hierarchical system. That if you're holding land, then there's someone who's holding that entire interest in land as a core group, which is their God, which is the law. So it's the law. That's why it's all law. It's as if you're dealing with a legal percentage, thus meaning there's a hierarchical system no matter what. You can't get out of it because that's what the system is. If you wanted to be employed at Psychos R Us Inc., then Psychos R Us Inc. is the system that you've agreed to act within. It is the entirety of the agreement with Psychos R Us Inc. It has rules and obligations to which, based on your level of management within that hierarchy system, you have to conform in order they can keep informed the original foundation of the company. You have certain duties and powers that form obligations that you must meet in order to continue to be hired under that agreement. Thus meaning no one individual society can ever hold land free from a higher interest than their own. The law is a mixture of pre-1066 pulled together by Alfred. And we sort of said that the Anglo-Saxon, Germanic, Celtic, Viking, Dutch common law fused with the Normans and the Roman civil law. That's what English law and civil law you were dealing with is. In France, they just took Roman law and worked with that. So too in Scotland. They didn't develop, so that's what's happening with Charles. They're pulling you back into Rome. They didn't develop like English law developed through the different structure of intermitting the common law. That was before AD 1066, and then moved on to land law, whereby the civil law gives all the rights into the person, which is still a legal persona, but gives all the rights in the person. It doesn't give the rights to the land. Common law gives rights into the land. The civil law gives rights into the person. Everything evolves in that person. When you grab a land interest, you have the full rights over that interest, whereby English law is that when you grab, you have a piece of land, the land holds that interest to which you then become subject to. It's different. The French just copied and pasted the Roman civil law. The English law didn't do that, but it takes attributes from it to form the rights to land. The common law after 1066 responded as issues arose concerning rights of tenancy to land. The evolution rights were first subjected to a despotic monarchy in which all land is cheated back as though to a divine ruler. That's the divine prerogative. As we already stated, the king had absolute or the high commission to oversee all land. Everything is cheated back to the king. Everyone who has held legal right to land was never more than a tenant, subject to the rules of the personal service, to the monarchy which governs the uses of land. Now we have moved into uses, we can bounce back and forth, as it is very instrumental in doing so in order we can cultivate into the mind the basic foundations to everything. We can begin to see where our power has always been and where we're giving it away. Yeah? So it goes from primogeniture to title, yeah? And then they're changing the title. So we can use these things now because you should have a mental picture of why we are where we are today. It's these agreements that they have to uphold might need certain changes, but more importantly, the bad boys have took over these systems a long time ago, have been moving themselves into those positions of beneficiary at our expense. The Noahide being the supreme trust. Takes you off as trustee, you're no longer trustee. And I've put a diagram together, we'll have a look up after this, because again, it'll help cement this, because this is the only picture you really need to focus to if you're trying to create the remedy and I think you're trying to seek, okay? Everyone who held legal right to the land was never more than a tenant subject to the rules of the personal service to the monarchy which governs the uses of the land. Now we have moved into uses. We've done that. Uses to land developed over time as lords wanted more control over their interest in land as an estate. The common law was limited in remedy and slow to hear issues concerning disputes over land that was being subdivided into small estates of beneficial use. And this is also called enclosure. This is what the Stuarts were fighting against on England. States of beneficial use. Front interests have been formed, and now, of course, the Roman Church is involved. The Roman Church was initially the big user of land that could be held in perpetuity under this corporation. So the Roman Church has always acted as the corporation. See Pope Francis, which is why the Jesuits call themselves the Company, and the East Indias also belong to this corporation, beholden to the Holy See. Yeah, as we've discussed. The Roman Church was not subjected to common law, nor could it hold the legal title in common law. So it was never the trustee, because the legal title was annexed to a personal service owed by each individual in honour and grace. So the Catholic Church then was always the beneficiary and the grantor. The king systems were the trustees. Yeah? Always ultimately going back to the corporation. The Roman Church was initially a predominant user of land, but what creates a use? The barons that created a use. So they were the initial big users. The barons who had to use the land they can never own, either absolute or allodium, they cannot hold a higher interest in what the king held. And the lords could not hold a higher interest to which the barons held or the tenants in chief. Each one had a legal percentage into which their duties and powers were confined within. They could not go past those boundaries. But as time evolved, and you had different kings, some kings were a little meaner and some more dictatorial than others, then it were up to the barons to ascertain when the king was overstepping those rights that were already developed through the agreements that had started from 1066. So in essence, the barons were also the ones that kept the king in check if he was stepping outside. This is where you get the battles between the barons and the kings, the parliament and the king, etc. The 1215 Magna Carta was the result of the barons who said that's enough, with King John, who was now being too overpowering. There was some dissension, and the church was on side with King John, remember. There was some dissension within the group of barons which brought them together, and they declared enough's enough. Thus was birthed the Magna Carta, or Great Charter, which was an agreement between the king and barons, yet under the duress of the king, which was King John at the time. And this is where you get the contention that comes into play around the value of the Magna Carta. But of course, you know, there were moves later to install what was the rights of the Magna Carta into the system of law, right down to the common man. The Henrys did it. Edward played about with it, and William and Mary also moved that idea into legislative law or parliamentary law. Where are we? The Lords were predominantly involved in Magna Carta because again they were under the tenants-in-chief or with the barons or under the barons. They had their own agreements and they had the hierarchical order to only answer to the barons. They couldn't go directly to the king. Magna Carta was reinstalled through the Henrys to include all down to the common man. So all the controversy about the Magna Carta would actually solve through the Henrys, Edward, and then William and Mary, which is why it's still in force. All right. The Magna Carta was reinstalled through the Henrys to include all down to the common man, and again through William and Mary, who enshrined the same into parliamentary legislative law. So although the original charter was nothing to do with the hierarchy beneath the barons, future monarchs would make it so. But the people have forgotten things that should not have been forgotten. Things were extracted, some principles were extracted, but you'll find that the principle extracted from all common law and then to create equity to which now you're involved through the person. Yeah, so they took extracts, they shifted it, Henry's did it, Edward's done it, William and Mary, Henry VIII even as well, and Elizabeth. They've all put the part in to pull what wasn't parliamentary law, wasn't so not constitutional law, has been moved in through time. Things were extracted, some principles, Things were extracted predominant features in order to create a synchronicity of where they came from, so give credence to the ideas of these new laws, which then gives power to the new agreement that was made today behind closed doors. Now, all this is going on behind closed doors today, so we are not able to agree. But because they've got you down on the dead trust, you're not being heard anyway, so you're not involved in the mix. Yeah, so it's the hoity-toits that are moving this way. The political class, the merchant class, the landowning or land-tenanted gentry, be they farmers or whatever, it's they that are in agreement. Yeah, so some of these farmers that you're looking at who are standing up tall, reckoning to protect, be very careful, because I think they're leading you into joining the dark side. The Roman law is a corporation. Look at 1290. Edward I stopped the rights of the Roman Church to control land outside the rights of the king. Where you had a duty in your power as a baron or lord, you had one as a villain, or serf, or a peasant. You had to provide a service to the hierarchical system in order to keep the entire manor running effectively. You had to pick so much fruit, hit somebody, make some products of metal. You had to provide some service, whatever that was, so that the entirety of the landholding could then feed the purse of the king. Yeah? The Roman Church operated such that you were allowed to give up certain interest to the church or to the corporation. So they could still give a bit of it up out there to the church, yeah? That was outside of what you owed to the king. Besides the service, you had to provide extras which came out of the wardships, called incidents and commonly known as taxes today. So these were extra charges that they started creeping in. You had to give 1/3 or so of that interest and pay at the time of your death. So the next in line, you had to settle all the debts and so forth of the father, whatever those debts were, to the king, if he wasn't able to pay the interest. It was all cheated back to the king. So the idea was to give away. So you know when you had your witch trials and all that in England, that's what it were about. So the widows, the merry widows that owned the land because their husbands had gone, the witch hunts were ways in which the system could take that off them, and by being accused of being witches. So you know, a lot of people that get excited about it no, that's not what it was about for people. So the idea was to give away some of that land to the corporation, and that corporation was not subject to common law because it was outside the common law. The common law was inherently an individual agreement, predominantly between baron and king. So a corporation was a perpetuity instrument, the Vatican. It never died. So it couldn't ever be bound to paying incidences or taxes, so the church never pays these, or wardships, because it never died, and that was the feature of the corporation. Do you get that? This is why the death certificate's needed. Yeah, give that some thought. Because it wasn't a feature of a corporation within the Roman Church. It's that which never died, unlike a baron who would die, and then the laws of inheritance would ensue, and then that would create the movement of transfer of values and settlement of debts to the king. But there was none of that with the corporation because it never died. So what happened is the lords were trying to transfer more of the land over to the corporation, the church, And so in 1290, the law of mortmain was commissioned by Edward I, which stopped that right to do so without first having the king's permission. And that's how we started with the use of equity, because the use never died. The use was something outside of common law in order to effect a right to control the land and the address outside the common law. Did you get that? I mean, that is, it's very interesting data. I hope you've understood that, because it is exceptionally interesting data. Now, we'll just bang back in here. Interesting, and does follow on from last week's data. As I've said, I've took it from a guy who's only been doing it for a month with this particular channel. Exceptionally interesting guy. I'm going to put his link under this, because I would suggest you start from the beginning of his videos. Now, with what I've given you, we've sort of gone through up to video 5. So if that interested you, get in there, because it gives it up, and we're all on now the 1925. I've got it written down. I've just changed books. We're coming under the, because I got into this before. I ain't got it might be in here. Right, I'm rubbish. No, what is it? For God's sake. 1925, that's the last shift in the law that we're all now suffering. And then, of course, we had the 1931 bankruptcy, didn't they? Declared 33 off the gold standard, blah, 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 blah. So the 1925 change is what's important for us to understand. So I will put he's called David. I forgot what his channel's called, but it doesn't matter, because I'm going to put it up after. So I hope that made sense to you guys. And then I'll just have a quick run through what yours. Then I've got something I want to show you. Oh, good, we're 20 minutes. We're okay. That's good. Okay, that's good. Alright, so I'll take that you're all chit-chatting. Excellent. Now, so I want you to have a look at this, and I need to get a pen out ready as well. Now, this is the easiest way to get this picture in, so you fully understand what's gone on since 1925 and why we're in such a mess, right? So let's just say we're starting off as it started off. You've got Mr. and Mrs. Lipstick, right? Now, Mr. and Mrs. Lipstick got a bit jiggy with it, right? And lo and behold, they had a baby, and they called it Johnny Ray, right? That's his given names, Johnny Ray. It has nothing to do with anybody except Genesis 1, right? And so this is down this side of the path is Genesis 1. And Johnny Ray has pulled right back into it by Mr. and Mrs. Lipstick getting a bit jiggy with it and creating this little creature here in Genesis 1. That name there, if you want to call it a name, it's not a name, call it a mark if you want, was given by mum and dad in love to this little flea bag that they created. Now on the other side, the dark side, you've got Genesis 2 going on. Now it comes in from a deception in its original form because it has to. So unbeknown to Mr. and Mrs. Lipstick, right, who've created Johnny Ray over here, a bunch of bad uns, called midwives and doctors and nurses. They're carrying out this hidden ledger game for Genesis 2, or the Lord God, also known as Babylon. And here we get the kings. So it's Genesis 2, Lord God, Babylon, kings. Okay, we could pick Rome in there as well, but, you know, Rome should be in there, so I'm a bit naughty. But I do bring it in further down. Anyway, it is Vatican as well, above kings. So Babylon and Vatican state kings. Now, they're playing a bit of a naughty game with placenta, because it comes out and it's alive. Okay? Then they class it as live born. They cut the cord, it's then classed as abandoned, and then it dies. So it was born alive, then dies, they create a surname on a title, piece of paper over here. And you haven't got a clue. Okay? Now, at that point, there's nothing untoward's gone on, apart from these bunches of shenanigans of creating files on you. You know, like Intel. Mr. and Mrs. Lipstick are loving Johnny Ray, having a whale of a time with the little flea bag, you know, all the shit and piss that comes out of them and that, you know. They're loving it, or maybe Mr. Lipstick's not as keen as Mrs. Lipstick, because of course it's just a lot of puke and smell and shit like that. But anyway, so there you've got red and blue blood coming out here, Johnny Ray. Alright? Everything's amazing until Mr. Lipstick, or even Mrs. Lipstick, decides to go and register. Okay, the event that Johnny Ray were born. Okay? So Johnny Ray, then they go and register. Well, something's happened then. Immediately, and they've no clue. What they've just done. See, Johnny Ray's over here, under Genesis 1, and at that point, he can't feed the kingdom. Because he's man. Albeit infant. And he can't be held in trust for the Vatican. Because he's just man. From the creation of Genesis 1. Innocent, full of beans, but all of a sudden these Mr. and Mrs. Lipstick's genetics are causing havoc in Johnny Ray because he's having to deal with all these crazy nonsense things that his mother and father got up to. Anyway, things are changing now because mum or dad has gone in there and registered this event. And what they've done unbeknown to them is drag Johnny Ray out of Genesis 1 and into Genesis 2. And in so doing, this dark side then fixes Johnny Ray to Lipstick. So now we've got the first parts of Johnny Ray Lipstick. He's not quite formed. He's still a youngster, but he's on the way. The path has been made for Johnny Ray. And there's a trust created. The grantor is the registrar. Mr. Lipstick and Mrs. Lipstick, as informants by receipt, become the trustees, which is why mother and father then as parents have to obey the state law, school, all the shit that you have to do. It's because they've done this, pulled him in, they're trustees. Beneficiary is still Johnny Ray, but he's not benefiting. He's still a flea bag. Alright? Now, it moves on. Because Johnny Ray is getting older. Yeah? He doesn't know he has to stay on this side. He's no idea. He doesn't know what the hell's gone up here with mum and dad. They have no idea. Now, Johnny Ray is getting older. Okay? He's gone to school. Straight away then, he's been forced to make a proclamation. Miss goes, "Is Johnny Ray Lipstick here today?" And he goes, "Yes, miss." That's the first proclamation that Johnny Ray has made and tied himself to this surname called Lipstick, which of course when they're creating it up here, it's a copy or a take on the family name. Okay, even mum and dad don't know this is going on. Poor Johnny just give his first proclamation. I am he. I am Johnny Ray Lipstick. Oh, a trust is created. The crown is now. As the trustee for the Vatican and Babylon and Genesis 2, the crown is now the grantor. The registrar is the trustee. And Johnny Ray Lipstick is the beneficiary. But he doesn't know it yet. He still doesn't know it because at this stage he's still got his living man. It's just tied to it and the damn bugger has proclaimed it so. That's his... Off he goes. He gets old, he goes through school, he's proclaiming this all over the shop. I'm Johnny Ray Lipstick. I proclaim, that's me. I'll fight you if you say anything different. Johnny is now Johnny Ray Lipstick, whether you like it or not. Now, off he goes, he's leaving school. What does he need? He needs something. He needs a national insurance number. Or he can't get any grafting. Off he goes, Johnny Ray Lipstick. Well, hang on. Just a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself here. A bit naughty. So Johnny's at school. He's proclaiming here, there and everywhere. Okay? Now, he's still really in this side because he's not benefiting, he's not, well, he's suffering it to a point because he has to go to school because his mum and dad are trustees and they're under contract agreement to the system. Now, so when Johnny goes to school, they're making him proclaim, but more importantly, this is where the fraud comes in slightly, but it's still in agreement with the system, so it's in honour. The school then begin to indoctrinate your offspring to be one side of this trust that's created by the Crown, Registrar and Johnny Ray Lipstick. Because the birth certificate is two things. It's either ID or it's discharge instrument. Right? Johnny Ray. But more importantly, because mum and dad are up here as trustee at that point, having to do everything that the school said, blah, 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 the state, mother and father, as parents, confirm the indoctrination given by the school. Johnny, you are Johnny Lipstick. Johnny Ray Lipstick, that's who you are, lad. Be proud of it. Your granddad will be proud of you. Yeah? It's fucked. School's indoctrinated him, mum and daddy backing it up. Because mum and daddy's stupid, because they did that up there. They have no idea what's going on here. No idea. They're off. Out every Saturday night, you're watching telly, whatever they're doing, football, whatever they're doing, they're not really interested. Gone. Now, Johnny gets a national insurance number. Okay? And then what happens? They create another trust. Lipstick is the grantor, the surname. Johnny Ray Lipstick becomes the trustee. He's going to get bummed. And the HM government, as a franchise from the Crown, is now the beneficiary on all its operations. Can you dig that? Now then, this is the game that everybody is trying to achieve. Okay? Now then. Because this is what you're after. If you want to come back into your power, God has to be the grantor. The earth has to be the trustee. Yeah? And you, as man, you need to be the beneficiary. Du, du, du! There you go. And that, ladies and gentlemen, everything I've papped on about for all these years, badly on some occasions, there's your picture. The data is last week's and this week's live streams. So, I hope that has made sense and simplified the issue just that little bit more, and also cemented into your mind exactly what it is they're up to with Charlie Boy. Okay, so there we have it, chaps. Let's have a look at what you're saying. In Scotland, we have the common law right to roam, and they are now trying to stop that. But you did have your original. There's somewhat of Arbroath was your common law system, but then it got pretty much, because you jocks have never been paying attention, you're too busy. Not you, Tree. I know you're beautiful and lovely. But the jocks in general that live in Scotland don't tend to get into this stuff. There's far too much data going on just hating the English. And, yeah, not good. Anyway. So, yeah, another listen. Definitely, you need to focus on this one. But last week's as well. But not necessarily get the 3 trustee idea in your head, because that's important. But just watch the video I put up. It's less hassle. But if you don't mind me gobbing off and shouting and screaming, no problemo. I'm happy with that as well, so I don't care. So I hope that went down. Hijack the Bible, these Babylons. Not quite got it there, my friend. Tree, not quite got it. Nearly got it. But that's not quite. More attention needs to be paid, Tree, is what I can say to that. Jace agrees. Take me a couple of listens to grasp anything. Yeah, take notes. If I'm ever doing anything, I'm taking notes. Easy. then and if there's something you need to go back to again, just put your note, just put the time in the video, go back, clarify, look at any words that you need to clarify, define. You're building the picture as you go. It's simpler than trying to go 25,000 things at once, if you get my meaning. I hope that were a bit more chilled out. Not quite as excitable as was. And God says 2 eyeballs looking down to the all right. Well, chaps, I will say thanks for joining me. I hope you have a good week. Try to keep off the diversions, because there's plenty of foot and they're giving it large everywhere. And it leaves me only one thing to say. Till the next time.
electronic